flick that wrist, check those digital watches. Do we both have one charged up and ready to go?
Josh, I think you have the same brand as I do now. Is that correct?
I have a Garmin now.
I have a Garmin.
I've defected from the Apple product, at least for a time. I think we mentioned on one of our last podcasts the idea that we're glad that the gospel is more than us being refurbished.
Yeah, exactly.
And that analogy came from the fact that I got a
bunch of
junky
refurbished
watch that annoyed me, and so I went with a different. Best thing about the Garmin so far, battery life.
Oh, battery life is
like
great.
10 days, 13 days.
You don't have to worry about like all the interactions with your phone. I mean, I don't have this tethered to a phone.
Well, I don't have anyone to interact with.
That's I suppose. Well, you know what I do? So, okay, I'll say this. I've got this, burner phone I carry around for things like.
Well, I know, but I don't know how many other people.
A bunch of other people.
Just dropping that you have a burner phone, pastor.
Right. So it's one of my weird idiosyncrasies, but it's to do certain things like I don't want the Garmin app on my actual phone. I want it on something that I'm not going to have like my actual privacy, I guess, kind of cross-contaminated with some of these throwaway apps. And I will say the Garmin app is super helpful.
It's nice.
I mean, it's got some good data, good metrics to show on there and everything. So, yeah, I think the Garmin's a good choice, Josh.
Yeah,
well done.
It's solid. It's actually literally solid. It's got like titanium. I like that it looks more like a watch. But enough about me. We flicked that wrist, and the digital watch told us it is
time to think, right?
time to think.
Yeah.
One thing to think about, Chris, that I wanted you to think about immediately is that our friendship is it's unnecessary. Do you know that?
Well, please elaborate, Josh.
See,
people have been telling me this for years. Like, Chris, really, my interactions with you are fairly unnecessary, so I'd like to cease those interactions immediately. I mean, this is typically after a couple of weeks. People say this to me, and then I just won't talk to anybody anymore. So.
Yeah, I just figured maybe the first thing I could say to you today is that this whole deal is unnecessary.
Okay.
I was reading C.S. Lewis's Four Loves. Yeah, you familiar with Four Loves?
I'm familiar with the concept. Yeah, I've never read the whole book, though.
So I'm doing kind of a project, doing some thinking on friendship in the church. So I'm reading his little chapter on friendship. He says some interesting things. He describes the difference between romantic love and friendship love, and what's it like if you fall in love with your friend, appropriately speaking, where you start with a friendship and then it ends up being a loving relationship. And he talks about the difference between companionship and friendship, where he would say companionship is something like, maybe something like what we're doing on the mic right now. You and I gather together to do a job. And there's a certain kinship because we're doing the job together. We're working things out. We're not maybe hunting antelope anymore, but we're hunting good ideas.
Yeah, we're
right?
hunting good ideas.
And so we're doing it together, and maybe even afterwards we'll say what went well, what went poorly. There's a companionship there. But Lewis says that's not friendship.
Okay.
That friendship can be born from that, but really where friendship comes from is when people engage in companionship, whether hunter-gatherers or artists or professors or workmen, they then stop their work, and then a couple of them realize, oh, you think like this too, or oh, you appreciate this too, and now there's something in addition to the companionship. Yeah. And so maybe an analogy would be you and I hop off the mic and we say, oh, how'd the game go? We both have an affinity for sports and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
What I found interesting in all that is he really wants to maintain that friendship is not, in survivalistic terms, necessary. What strikes you there?
I mean, kind of a Maslowian approach, the hierarchy of needs. Is he basically saying that you don't really need it to survive?
Right. I think he would say companionship, you need to survive because there are basic things for the community that need to be done. So survival necessitates hunting and gathering, or building and planting and those types of things. But it doesn't necessitate the kind of joyful, I think he called it the exquisite arbitrariness of kind of two people loving the same thing for the sake of loving the same thing.
Sure. Or loving each other then. Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say based on my frequent and constant rejections throughout my entire life.
Is that what got you on Jeopardy?
Well, yeah, perhaps.
Please don't say no.
I think, boy, there's probably a good chance you don't actually need it because I've survived this long without anybody actually caring about me. But
are you fishing for compliments right now? Because I'll take the bait.
No, not fishing for compliments. I'm just trying to be, I don't know, denigrating, self-deprecating,
flagellating.
I was going to say going through the list.
Just not immolating.
But yeah, self-immolating. So, yeah, I mean, I would say I disagree with C.S. Lewis on this point. I would disagree with him because I think being created in the image of God, there is a friendship component. Abraham is called a friend of God. And I don't think that's necessarily because Abraham developed a certain relationship beyond companion status. I think it's built into the way that relationship operates. In fact, I would say that to relate on a less than friendship level with people is it is less than what a relationship should be.
Okay.
Now, I say that on the basis of relational interactions that are transaction based, where you just interact with people because you're accomplishing a similar goal, or you're trying to get something, and that person can give you that something, and then you walk away. It's the classic drive-through. You go through the McDonald's drive-through, like, hey, want some chicken McNuggets, and then both smile, both say have a good day, but you really don't think about that person after the fact. I think C.S. Lewis made another statement to the effect of, "You've never met a mere mortal," and so I think that's somewhat at odds with what he's communicating here. And perhaps I'm just overreading this a little bit, but when he says you've never met a mere mortal, what I'm taking from that is what I think his intent was indeed to communicate that the people you're interacting with, the people that you talk to, the people that you spend time with regularly and irregularly, are all the same souls that have some type of eternal consequence to them. And so when you're talking with somebody and when you're cultivating some type of relationship, I think the end goal, that the ultimate good purpose of any relationship should be some type of mutual care and correspondence, between one another, that says that I care about you, you care about me. I think that's kind of ideal and Edenic, whereas I think transaction-based relationships are effectively a fallen reality.
Yeah, that's good. And
why, thank you.
One of the things that I'm not just saying that because I'm your friend. One of the things that Lewis points out is that there is much literature in kind of the classic Greeks about friendship, but relatively little in modern times discussing friendship. So you laughed when you walked in. I said something about the Aristotelian philosophy of friendship. Yeah. But the fact is, Aristotle had a philosophy of friendship.
And he had no friends, though.
Oh, bummer. Cicero had a philosophy of friendship. I read this guy, Alred of Rivaux, from like the 10th century. He had a 80-page book on spiritual friendship. And so there were older writers writing about these things. And what's interesting, Chris, is there's now a renewed writing about loneliness. It's not about friendship or a theology of friendship, but about the lack of friendship. So a lot of, like, Pew has done some research.
Florence Pugh?
No, the research center.
Oh, research.
Yeah,
okay, keep going.
So Pew has done research, and the American Survey Center has done research. People have called it a loneliness epidemic. A lot of people are talking about the relationship of people to those outside their family.
Okay.
Seems like general evidence is that you and I have, just as Americans, people in the West, have a similar amount of immediate family relationships. We have a similar amount of coworker relationships, but the friendship category has just been decimated.
Yeah, I can see that.
Some of the statistics that I was reading, it's like less than 30% of men and women under the age of 50 say they have more than just one or two close friends.
Wow.
And then, corollary research saying that people are most satisfied if they have 6 or more.
Okay.
So most people,
What about the people on Facebook, Josh? I mean, like hundreds and hundreds of friends. Everybody has hundreds of friends, Josh.
It just goes to show you that if you use the same word, it doesn't really matter what the meaning behind the word is. Yeah.
Definition. Okay.
And so this is kind of where my mind has been for a couple months, thinking about how friendship intersects with the church. And so the reality is you have a lot of people in our society that are digitally highly connected, but they report that they don't have more than one, maybe two people that they've shared a substantive conversation, something that's hard to talk about, something religion or politics or suffering or something like that. And not just I shared a post of politics, but I engaged with someone and we wrestled through a differing opinion kind of relationship. And so then this is kind of maybe stirring the pot a little bit for our next affirmation, which is on God's new people.
Okay, so I was going to ask Josh, I mean, is there a way to find an answer to this epidemic?
And so God's new people, our next affirmation really is a society that God has instituted where friendship becomes highly likely.
Sure.
Right? It's like friendship is somewhat easy to a degree in high school, because you go class to class, you share the hallway. Okay, almost everyone has some friends, even if you got to find the little offshoot friend groups. College, you have a ton of time, right? But a lot of Americans report that in in their late 20s, it starts to become really hard.
The bottom drops out.
To find friends, right? Maybe they move and they don't have those types of easy things like high school or college. And as less and less Americans are doing things like church, they're not engaging in civic communities or clubs. There's less and less places where you're just going to rub shoulders with people in that kind of C.S. Lewis companionship category, and then stumble into people that think like you, love the things you love, those types of things. And so I thought I had a better transition, but I'll just admit that I forgot it, and we'll jump straight into the affirmation if it comes back. But just wanted to present God's new people as our affirmation, as really God's solution to this struggle to find companionship and friendship. And also way more than that, but certainly a solution.
Sure.
So here's God's new people. It's a little bit longer, so buckle up. We believe that God's new covenant people have already come to the heavenly Jerusalem. They are already seated with Christ in the heavens. This universal church is manifest in local churches, of which Christ is the only head. Thus, each local church is in fact the church, the household of God, the assembly of the living God, and the pillar and the foundation of the truth. The church is the body of Christ, the apple of his eye, graven on his hands, and he has pledged himself to her forever. The church is distinguished by her gospel message, her sacred ordinances, her discipline, her great mission, and above all, by her love for God and by her members' love for one another and for the world. Crucially, this gospel we cherish has both personal and corporate dimensions, neither of which may properly be overlooked. Christ Jesus is our peace. He has not only brought about peace with God, but also peace between alienated peoples. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both Jew and Gentile to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. The church serves as a sign of God's future new world when its members live for the service of one another and their neighbors rather than for self-focus. The church is the corporate dwelling place of God's Spirit and the continuing witness to God in the world. And as we've done before, I'll say, Chris, what do you think? And Chris will say, well, that about says it. And then I'll joke that this is the end of a time to think, and then we'll hang up. Anything that pops out to you there, Chris?
Yeah, Josh, I would say that the affirmation of faith that we have, it does span a lot of theological matter. And, you know, depending on what one wants to tease out of it, there's a lot that can be said. I mean, you know, relationship between Jew and Gentile, the, you know, identity of the people of God, the already, you know, saying that already we are before the Lord in the heavenly Jerusalem and so forth.
Right.
But I do think for our purposes today, as we talk about this, you know, we only have so much time and we're only going to do one episode on this. And so I think that it's helpful in light of our current cultural context. And, you know, we have a younger church community. You know, we're not overbalancing with people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, or anything like that. I mean, we tend to have younger families, college students, and everything. I think it does. I think it does warrant a hearty discussion during this time of the place of the church in developing really the social identity of a human being, the social identity of the Christian person, right? Because we do have a moment right now in time, and I definitely see this, you know, working in a college town, working with college students, just seeing and I'm not saying this because I see this necessarily in the individuals that I'm regularly around, but just perceiving this from conversations that I have and discussions, you know, how do I do this? How do I do that? Just the way that, you know, a lot of Gen Zers now are trying to find their way socially and right. Trying to understand, like, how do I actually talk with people? I mean, I was, this past week we had
and they're coming to you for that.
Well, they are coming, yeah. And this past week we had our last forum, you know, which is our campus ministry in Point, last forum of the semester before students leave for Christmas break. And one of the things we were talking about, like, we got to talking about the issue of dating. And the issue of dating, you know, just what I reflected to them was that, you know, what's very odd to me is that we now live in a time and a place where you express interest in, you know, member of the opposite sex by opening up your phone and seeing somebody that you are attracted to based on what they're presenting to you. And then you can, with a flick of your thumb, move one direction or another and say, yeah, let's see if this person works. Whereas when you and I were younger, and the interactions that we have with members of the opposite sex were typically based in friendships or in social settings, group situations, people that we knew. And then we're like, oh, I'm interested in her, right? And so you might have a
talk
conversation.
to a mutual friend.
Yes, talk to a mutual friend.
Do you think so-and-so would be interested?
Exactly.
How would I, if they're interested in someone else, how would I talk to them if they were?
Yes, yeah. Can I get her phone number? Do you think she likes me? Those types of things. And I don't think that those types of interactions are necessarily par for the course anymore. And it makes me sad to think about that because, there's always kind of the fun little, adolescent drama that comes along with that. But really, we're cheating people now out of the opportunity to actually cultivate a knowledge of other people, so that now, as we interact with others, we're so intensely transactional, right? Where you just think, okay, how do I determine whether or not this person is compatible with me? Well, do I like how they look? Do I like how they present themselves? As opposed to, hey, I've seen so and so do this or say this, and we've been around each other for a while, and I've talked to her friends. Like, there's a vetting process that just for the past several thousand years we've undergone, right?
It's an informal vetting process.
Exactly.
Largely.
Exactly. And so now the vetting process is incredibly, self-driven. We're the ones who are sitting in judgment on another person. Do I like her? Do I like him? How do we go forward with this and everything? So I think really what the church provides, Josh, that I think we need to, kind of lean into this morning is really a discussion of how the church gives us opportunities to really experience our humanity as social beings, recognizing that God is social, right? I mean, we have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God is social, and they have eternally delighted within each other's company in the persons of the Godhead, one God in three persons. And so as human beings, we're created to delight in the presence and company of other people. And the hostility that our affirmation of faith talks about is a hostility that's represented in ethnic conflict, the conflict between Jew and Gentile specifically there. But really, you just think about, even the words that Paul says to Titus, where he talks about, we ourselves once passed our days in malice and envy, hating others and being hated by others. The way that, we can feel fallenness sometimes is just the types of interactions that are riddled with "I don't like you," and for the church to step in and say, well, there's a restoration that's going to occur for people who come from different backgrounds, different likes, different dislikes, who are now going to love each other and genuinely love each other. And I think that's where Lewis kind of gets it wrong. The ideal is not a Maslowian, well, now you've reached the ability to have deep relationships. It's you should have deep relationships. So
yeah, another way to get at the importance of this topic is now, I tend towards just saying, hey, this is right, and so do it, and you'll figure out why it's good later. And I think that there's an obedience aspect to that. However, it is helpful to say, here is where you've already tasted how what's wrong is wrong. That's the existential component, right? You've let's say you're looking at it from the book of Ecclesiastes perspective. Okay, you've gone after pleasure, you've gone after riches. It didn't satisfy. Would you maybe now be willing to listen to go after a different thing? Something that's not under the sun.
It's kind of a Tim Keller approach.
Is it?
Yeah, I would say so. I think he used to engage in things that way. Yeah.
Kind of point out the cultural idols, how they failed you. And one of the ways you can figure out what an idol is when it fails you and you get really mad or you get really depressed and you realize, I was hoping in something that failed me.
Yeah, like when Micah Parsons got injured last
time. Bummer. Do we want to take a moment of silence?
No, I do hope he gets better as a human being and as a football fan, but man, it was rough. It was rough.
So the idea is, one way to say it, we could go through this affirmation and say, look, the church is the right thing. It's God's plan. You should be involved in it. And I want to do some of that. The other way we can do it is to say, don't we already see the void that is created when we go after the wrong thing?
Right.
When we think that we can create our own institutions, when we think that we will find our own social satisfaction through our own means, when we think we can come up with a better type of dating, which then just leaves us feeling lonely and judged. And I was even reading today about how there's kind of I think it's Bumble version for friendship. It's like I'm new and I'm lonely, I can find friends. And but the person was like, even on there I get matched and no one reaches out to me. No one. And so there's still, even on that matching thing, there's this loneliness of rejection based on, and so it just goes really deep. And to say, I think many people have a degree of loneliness. It comes out in, I've run into a couple different people at the gym who are struggling in various aspects of life, and I meet with them, and it comes out hey, I haven't talked to anyone in years about this.
Yeah.
And that is heartbreaking because I'm thinking from the church's perspective, I've had 3 Bible studies this week, and then I had Sunday service. And so I have so many people that I could reach out to if I'm having a bad week, bad month, bad year.
Right.
But that's not the reality for people outside the church. And so just thinking through how our culture, I think, is experiencing the influence of loneliness and the lack of deep friendships. The other part of that is, I was reading just this morning about how typically loneliness and isolation bring out things like anger and malice.
Sure.
Because it's more of an in-group, out-group, opposition, anger, whereas things like a deep friendship allow us to, instead of me having vitriol towards someone, I can say to Chris that I'm sad. It's like that's going to limit the anger I feel when I can actually express my lament or my sorrow to someone who cares about me.
Nobody cares, right?
You're a good friend. This is how dudes work. Apparently, we just make fun of each other. And so that's another way to say one of the reasons it's important to solidify how the church is a foundational part of the social identity of the Christian is to say we see what it feels like when we don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We see what it feels like when we treat the church like it is it's a movie theater. It's a place where you can go once a week to get a good feeling and
absorb the same content. Say, I like that content with other people who like the same content.
Rather than seeing it as all of these different metaphors that we read. The household, the temple, the assembly, the body. All of these metaphors in the New Testament assume an attachment and a building together.
Sure.
Such that if I was looking at my house, let's say I have a brick house. I don't, but we're going to imagine that I have a brick house and I look at it tomorrow and there's a brick gone. I would care. I mean, maybe the house isn't going to fall down if one brick's gone, but all of a sudden a couple bricks are gone.
Where'd that brick go?
And it certainly doesn't look as good as it once did, and it's certainly not as structurally sound as it once was. And we're supposed to see the church as Peter says, a building together of living stones. And when we see buildings, we don't just say, that stone's unnecessary, take it out.
Yep.
It's the church, they'll be like a Jenga tower in that way, where we're just removing blocks and seeing if it can stand. And so I think that let's reflect a little bit on those analogies, Chris, when we think about the social needs of the Christian and the institution of the church, where we have body, temple, household, assembly. None of those analogies can be achieved individualistically.
Oh, of course, yeah.
What do we learn from those analogies?
Yeah, they are all employed to designate corporate togetherness. I mean, like that's literally how they're employed, right? So Paul brings up this body metaphor, and he's like, look, if you consider what body's got body parts, and these body parts function in different ways, but these body part says to another body part, you're unnecessary. You're unnecessary. Just get out of here. I mean, that would be foolish, right? Paul says that's foolish. We don't do that within the church, which is like a body. You think about...
And he says it both ways. He says, I don't know if these are the exact analogies, but the eye can't say I have no need of the ear. So that's the arrogance part.
Right.
But also the ear shouldn't say, I'm not an eye.
Right.
That's the despairing
part. So
I'm
useless.
Right? So you can't be overbearing and arrogant, nor should you be despairing and feel helpless and useless. All parts of the body have a certain degree of worthiness and value.
Yeah. So we have body, we have assembly, the assembly, it's the calling out, the called out ones. I mean, that's literally what it is, right? It's those who are called out together.
Yeah.
And so there is no sense that the church are those who are called out, even though we're talked about as being called out individually, right? The Lord knows us by name. We're predestined from before the foundation of the earth to be holy and blameless before Him. In love, He predestined us for that. And yet He predestined us for adoption as sons, as daughters, together in one family, right? So
blameless as a bride.
Yeah. So
cumulatively,
we are in this family together, and so you think, okay, yes, I was known by name before I had a name, right? I was known by name before I even existed, and yet that was true about every other genuine believer, right? Every other genuine Christian person has this identity that says known by name before I had a name, like known by God before I existed. Designated to be an heir of life with Christ along with these other people. So, I mean, all these different metaphors, all these different analogies that are applied throughout the Bible are given to us to show that the church is a together entity, and that a type of coming to Christ for me and Christ and nobody else is an incredibly foreign concept, and not just foreign concept in as much as it's a silent issue, but it's a foreign concept in as much as it's pushed back against, right? Repeatedly pushed back against.
And I think one thing that I really want to emphasize here, Chris, because I believe it's a big point of confusion, and I'll go a step further to say it's usually a big point of justification for leaving a church, is to say, well, sure, the church is a collection, a gathering, a group. It's not just about me, but that's about the global church, the universal church. Whereas our affirmation says the universal church is manifested in local churches. And so the Christian holds two things at once, that there is a universal bride of Christ. So it's called in different traditions the invisible church, the elect. It's all the people that are going to be sitting at the table with Jesus in Revelation 19 collectively. And some of those people are dead. Some of those people potentially are not even alive yet. We don't know when the Lord, how long he'll tarry. And so we've got people not only in our city and in our country broadly that will never meet, in our world who've been before us, who've been after us. They all comprise the universal bride of Christ. And that universal bride is manifested locally in tangible gatherings, visible gatherings of believers connected to one another. Now, that distinction between universal and local gets confused or more intentionally distorted when someone is wrestling with whether or not they want to be a part of this or that local church. And I've heard more times than I like, well, I'm not leaving the big C church. I'm not leaving the universal church. I'm just going to a different church. And I want to talk about that, Chris, because I think a lot of well-meaning Christians confuse those categories and use it as a justification for splitting from one body to another without understanding the ramifications of what actually happens when you split from a body. What do we need to know about those distinctions and how to guard against confusing them?
I mean, I think the first distinction that we need to be clear is that the Bible does distinguish membership from the local church and the church universal. That membership in the church universal is, when you're being spoken to as a Christian, right? That's true. But when it comes to the local church, there is an assumption, and not just even an assumption, and many times just explicit statements. You think of what does Paul tell Timothy when he's at the church at Ephesus? He says, I have written these things to you, this is 1 Timothy 3, so that you may know how one ought to behave in the house of God, the household of God, the church of the living God. This is written, and so all the different things that pertain to 1 Timothy and the content are local church related. And so you have elders and deacons, like the establishment of elders and deacons. Now, let me be clear for an individual who might be saying, yes, but the big C church, the little C church, no big deal, I'm still in the big C church. Well, here's the thing. I can't show up at, Bethlehem Baptist Church in Minneapolis, church I love and deeply appreciate. I,
Christopher, am an elder of the Big C Church.
Yes, therefore, you are obligated to listen to my leadership here at Bethlehem Baptist. I can't do that. And so it is just as foolish for somebody who is a member of a local church to say, you know what, with no good reason. And by no good reason, I mean there has not been some serious breach of pastoral integrity, so that, let's say there's somebody there's a leader in the church has been abusing people and the other leaders have not held that individual accountable, or there's been a departure from sound doctrine without any type of pushback. Like, those are the reasons that you leave a local church that has been faithful to Christ and faithful to you. You can't just show up in another church and say, hey, you know what? I just like this one better. Just like I can't leave our church and say, you know what? I just like this other church, but I'm going to pastor this church, and you got to listen to me, right? Like the other church, you got to listen to me, and your pastor can leave here because I just like it better here. We can't do that, right? It's a foolish thing to engage.
So
in
when you kind of tease it out to other implications like tithing.
Sure.
Well, if we went to another church in town and asked for their members to tithe to our church, because we're all part of the Big C Church, that would be inappropriate.
Correct.
And it's not inappropriate because a Christian shouldn't give to missions outside of the church, but it just doesn't match with those images of how a household is an image of people that are under a shared roof who are coming together for a shared cause. A temple built with living stones is an image of stones that are not scattered anymore. They're not just laying around. They're not transitioning. Like, once a stone is built into a temple, the stone doesn't go to other temples. It's not like my siding is on my house today and on my neighbor's house tomorrow.
I need your siding, Josh.
That's not how buildings work, right? And so that's what I want to draw across. There's more reasons than just pastoral abuse. There are methodological reasons that you might feel a significant friction with a church, and you might move slowly in that, and you might wrestle with the elder board, and you might ultimately end up leaving to a new church. But what I want to call to mind is the idea that saying I'm part of the Big C church means I'm not really leaving a local church.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. There is actually a splitting. There's a relational severing, and there should be. Like I'll tell people in the membership process, I'll take them to Ephesians 20 after Paul is giving his last charge.
Acts 20.
Gosh, Ephesians 20. What would Ephesians?
Josh wrote a couple extra chapters.
Would Ephesians be better or worse if it had 20 chapters? More
Depends
diluted.
who wrote it.
Yeah. So I'll take him to Acts chapter 20, where Paul is in Ephesus talking after 2.5 years or so to the Ephesians, and it says at the end that they wept together.
Yeah.
Because he was leaving and he didn't think he was going to see them again. But that's the goal of God's new people.
Is to weep.
You want to be grafted together, built together in such a way that if someone were to leave for good reasons or bad reasons, you would cry.
Yes.
And so that's what I want to get across to people. If they're looking at leaving, is to say, and this is not just leaving our church, but if they're looking at coming to our church from another church, and I have a sense that, hey, you haven't done the due diligence with that elder board. Yep. I want to be serious to say, no, there's actually a splitting, a severing that's happening when it's not just a transition in the same way that I'm going to go from getting my grocery pickup at Sam's Club to doing Instacart at Aldi.
Right.
People want to speak in that way because it feels like it's going to hurt less, but it doesn't hurt less because the point of God's new people is to be gathered together, to be built together. And so I wanted to use that example. My skin crawls a little bit when I hear the whole Big C, Little C church thing because it usually softens the actuality of the local church. And I think if you just open up Paul's letters, open up Ephesians, and it says you got to bear with one another in love. You got to be humble. You got to be patient. You got to forgive as Christ is forgiven. You got to let no deceitful talk in your mouth. You got to not let bitterness win the day. Be angry and not sin. You just can't do that with all the churches in town.
Right.
All of the kind of Christian commands that we're called to, they necessitate a type of body contact that leads to a friction that leads to the need to be patient.
Yep.
And those are the types of things that maybe you can't point to a Bible verse and say, well, this is the little C or big C, but you can say, hey, wisdom says if I'm going to be close enough to someone for them to tick me off and me to tick them off and us to have to forgive each other, it's going to take some time and an attachment, and it's going to take that attachment for me to get through my anger, to feel a certain ownership over that person and vice versa. Yeah. So Universal Church, I want to talk as well, Chris, about something I'll call enduring friendship.
Yeah.
It's something that's been huge in my life over the past 5 years. And I think it's really void in our culture is having a friendship where you can be significantly upset with someone for a long period of time, push through it, and be better friends afterwards.
Okay.
That's the exact opposite of social media friendship. Yeah. It's the exact opposite of a culture that deems people as toxic and says, I'm out, whether they're my parents or a friend. Yeah. Friendships right now in our culture are so fragile because we're all suspicious and we're waiting for you to prove that you're not trustworthy. And as soon as you do, I'm out. However, that eliminates one of the things that church provides, which is when Ephesians 4, which is chapter 4 of 6, not 20, Ephesians 4, when you have to bear with one another in love, you have to be eager to maintain the unity of spirit and the bond of peace, because there's only one spirit, and you're in him. And when you have to forgive one another as God in Christ forgave you, then what you're doing is you are committed to one another in such a way that you will press on through and past significant relational disagreements. And on the other side of that is a peace and joy and richness that you cannot buy on the front side of it. And I'll say that, just cards on the table, me going from just a dude in the church to being the pastor created relational friction with some dear friends. Sure. Not for 2 minutes, not for 2 months, but for like 2 years in some, where it's just, man, it just feels like there's tension between you and I. And a lot of that was me being young and making mistakes. And a lot of it was just the nature of changing roles and us trying to figure it out together. But I can say there's at least 2 friendships in the church that are infinitely sweeter today because by virtue of being in the church together and none of us leaving, we had to forgive one another often, bear with one another in love, press on, And some of these guys, I wouldn't want to spend time with anyone else in the world more than I do right now with them, because there's just a sweetness of knowing, hey, you're not going anywhere, I'm not going anywhere. You've had to forgive me, I've had to forgive you.
Yeah.
This is a rich relationship.
Yeah.
Can you reflect on how the church presents us that opportunity to push through these times of tension and frustration to get somewhere sweeter on the other side?
Yeah, it's, I would say the family picture is what's helpful for us in this, because within a family, I mean, it's a sad reality, but it's a reality, and I guess it's a normal reality of sorts that, you typically don't have conflict with people more outside your home than you do inside, in terms of like the kind of the depth sometimes of feeling like, oh man,
like you're going to hurt more people in your house than outside.
Yeah, you're going to say more dumb things there. You're going to hurt more people there within your own
let your
home.
Guard down and really speak your mind sometimes.
Exactly. And so that being said, the ethics should be similar to say, all right, look, unless there's something super serious that goes on, by super serious, right now, like super serious, that happens, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so within the church, if you embrace the identity of the church as the family of God, as the household of God, then you better give me a really good reason why you staying angry at me and saying I'm out is God's way of handling things. Like there better be a really good reason to do that. And I think when you can start to understand that, and I think this is fed into significantly by and I'll keep whipping the social media post right now. I guess that's kind of a double entendre. Is a social media post. It's whipping post.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, whatever.
Well done.
But we have been programmed through the way that social media operates. We've been programmed to look at people in an I'm out type of a way.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh, unfriend. Not gonna follow you anymore. Block. That's just what I'm gonna do. And again, there are good reasons to do some of that stuff, right? Like if you're getting harassed regularly by somebody in social media, okay, cool. Like block that person. But if you just don't like the fact that they, are constantly reposting, I love my Chevy truck, and you don't like Chevy trucks, like, hey, you should really reconsider the fact that you're.
Oh, come on, give something more realistic. Like they disagree on immigration policy.
Okay, sure. Well, I didn't want to go that direction inflammatorily, but yeah, so there are issues that people will disagree with profound amounts of
passion.
Well, yeah, let's say passion, conviction. Those are some words for them. But you encounter people like this, and the church, the common identity of the church, necessitates that we recognize, if I spend eternity with you, then it is not right for me to spend here and now at odds with you, unless that at odds is something which is what the Lord Himself, like you need to, right? If you have a grievance with your brother, and this is something where it's like, I just don't like him. I don't like him. I hate him. And there's no good reason to be at odds with somebody, meaning like there's not a serious breach that hasn't been dealt with, the other party, whatever. Then you should leave your gift at the altar, right? Let your worship wait until you have this resolved, because God desires us to have relationships that are whole. And the church is the place where this occurs, because we are under one Lord. We have one playbook. We have one Bible that we take the same cues from, which is why it is heartbreaking to see that, Christian people can tolerate the type of attitude that says, what, I'm good. I don't need you, in such a way that you're willing to pull your stone out of the house and say, this will stand without me.
Well, and I think that's where the idea of membership, like when we're advocating for membership constitutionally in our church, we're advocating that as a secondary principle based on a primary theological principle.
Yes.
It's not that we think membership is primary because we need to have books and we need to know who's tithing and we need to know who's voting, but we see in the scriptures membership in terms of body and household. We're trying to reflect it in a practical wisdom way in the Constitution. But really it's about the fact that when Paul talks in 1 Corinthians 12 through 14, in Ephesians 4, about the members of the local church, he's talking about people who are attached to one another. Like your finger is attached to your hand is attached to your wrist, your arm is attached to your elbow. There's a high degree of attachment such that if any of those members were severed from one another, then the body would lose some sort of functionality and health. And so when we're talking about members, being attached to one another and about severing those relationships, it does no good for the hand to say, well, I just don't care if I lose 2 fingers.
Right.
Because you should care. Because when Paul talks about the body, he gets to the point where he says, effectively, therefore, we ought to weep with one another and rejoice with one another because their good is our good. Or
and treat with honor. I mean, that's another thing you think when he's talking about, members of the body that aren't presentable. He's like, you treat them with honor. And so even members of the body, and however far you want to extend this type of picture, to say, maybe there are members of the church that aren't very impressive to the world. You know what you do? Like, you treat them with greater honor because you are members of one body.
Yeah, and you forgive because you're members of one body, right? The idea of withholding forgiveness because of that kind of mentality you said earlier, which was, I'm good.
Right.
You're not. That's what the body metaphor is telling you, is you withholding forgiveness from someone in the body is not good for you, right? And so all of these metaphors, they take us outside of this kind of individualistic appeal to what I think is right or to what I feel good about, and to say, no, actually there's a commitment, an ownership, a mutual good that is happening in this institution that's pictured as a body. And this is not just a body because we think it's the best analogy. This is the body of Christ. I mean, hear this sentence. The church is the body of Christ, the apple of his eye, graven on his hands. He has pledged himself to her forever. To call something or someone the apple of someone's eye is to say that thing is placed in a position of delight and treasure.
Yeah.
Now, in a culture that how do I say this? When the church is talked about, it's talked about negatively.
Sure.
Voting patterns, sitcoms, problems in the country. Like what's the problem? The church. How do we think about our own churches? How does that seep into a way where we're like sometimes 1 foot in, 1 foot out on the church? We're baked in a suspicious, critical society, particularly in regards to the church. But our affirmation is saying this is the apple of Jesus' eye.
Right.
This is the one graven on his hands, the one he's committed to. It should be stated that Christ has committed himself to one universal cause that he said won't be defeated by the gates of hell.
He will build his church.
And it's not democracy.
Right.
Yep. It's his church. Why do we need to hammer home the delight that Christ has for his church, even when, and maybe even especially when, the church has her stains, the church has her need for growth?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few different things I can think of right now, Josh, that I think are pertinent to this. And sometimes you'll hear people say things like, I love my church, and they'll follow it up with something that suggests, because this church meets my needs. So then you press that a little further. Well, what needs is the church meeting? There are 2 ways that we can answer that question.
Okay.
One is satisfactory, one is dissatisfactory. Unsatisfactory. Dissatisfactory, one of the 2. It's not.
I'm dissatisfied.
I'm dissatisfied, right. So, on the one hand, you might say the church is meeting my needs because it's given me an opportunity to grow in loving fellowship with other believers and grow in holiness with the people of God in such a way that, I am constantly being challenged and loved and encouraged and nourished and cared for. All right, if your church is meeting those needs, you're growing in sound doctrine, you're growing in maturity in Christ, you're growing in deeper love for other believers and the cause of Christ in the world, then you should prize your church and say, yes, this is the church that, like, Jesus is committed to this church, the mission of this church, et cetera. But the way that I think oftentimes people will talk about churches, that lends itself to the idea of criticism, right? To say, like, just toss these grenades of criticism out there, are when churches are seen not as the entity that Jesus designed them to be, but as units of social interaction that are designed to meet our perceived needs. And so by perceived needs, I mean, I would like a place where I feel good about myself. I would like a place where I find other people that look like me. I find another place that people have the same socioeconomic background. A place that is comfortable and pleasant for me. Because when you see a church like that, and then one of those pieces gets, jangled around with, and it's like, well, I don't like the church anymore. because you don't see the church as the church is designed to be. You see the church as an organization that's co-opting language, right? So if your church is so heavily focused on cultivating an identity that mentions Jesus and might mention the Bible, but is really focusing on all these other tangential aspects of personal experience, really what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a position to evaluate the church on terms that God never intended church to be evaluated on. I mean, search the scriptures and find a place where God has commanded the church to provide the most beautiful facility and welcoming environment.
Production quality.
Yes, production quality, lights, sound, whatever. It's not like it's wrong to have, good lighting, not like it's wrong to have decent sound. But if the church is so focused on that, and when you're thinking, what do I love about my church? I'm thinking, well, man, the worship. But what is that? Is it worship or is it the music? When I think about the fellowship, okay, well, is it fellowship or is it you see other people that are like you? Is the teaching, meaning I'm being challenged from the Word of God as it's being opened and expounded to me regularly? Or is it I feel good when I leave? Mm-hmm. Right? These are all different things that we easily use within evangelicalism, different language, like we use the same language to communicate different things. And so it all circles back to the issue of like how we see the church and the apple of Jesus' eye. This is so precious to him. Man, if you think that the apple of Jesus' eye is beautiful because you have a beautiful sound system and lighting for your Sunday morning experience, then you are missing the point. You're missing what makes the church beautiful. What makes the church beautiful is that Christ died for his people to be a holy people, to be a set-apart people, to be a new people who are spanning all these different things and who might meet in places that are not beautiful, who might even meet in homes. You go to a closed country and the church is beautiful when 15 people are braving the cover of darkness to meet because at 2 a.m. they know they're not going to be executed for being Christian people. Like that's what's precious to Jesus. But when we start substituting these things and we come back to the issue of being critical, it's like, well, how can you criticize a church where people are loving each other to the point where they might die? Well, you can't. But how do you criticize a church where it's, the music's not as good anymore? Like, well, then your definition of the church needs to be radically overhauled at that point.
One thing here is, because getting at the kind of needs experience language is neither one of us would, you mentioned like a social institution. We started this podcast by saying the church is a good social institution.
Right.
So we're not denying that there is a certain fruit that comes from these things. We're not denying that there is an experience of the Lord that comes through God-glorifying worship. But what I think we always need to have in our minds is we want to take like an A to B route. We want to go from where we are to what we want. We want an experience of God, so we chase the experience. Right. Actually, one of the things C.S. Lewis says about friendship is if you're chasing friendship, you'll never have a friend, because that's not what friendship is.
Maybe that's been my problem all these years, Josh.
His point is friendship is chasing an object of desire together. Therefore, if you're chasing a friend, you can't have a friend because friendship is not chasing friendship, it's chasing an object.
That's legit. That's well assessed.
You could use that dynamic to talk about the things in God's economy that he decrees for our good is you're not just chasing goodness. You're not just chasing your goodness. You're chasing what God has ordained. And then there is goodness, right? Yeah. And so you think about this in terms of God has said in his word, once you were not a people, now you are a people.
Yeah.
That's what he said. And so why would you go to church? Because you're not an individual anymore. You were once not a people. You were an individual, but now you're a people. You're collected together. You're made one new man. You're into a building. You're in a body, all these different things. Well, lo and behold, when you see that as good and right and true, you're now in an institution where you have something that most people in our current society don't have, which is the ability to just meet people pretty easily. It's like one of the things that I read in some of these different research things is people are saying, well, I don't know how to get the amount of casual interaction and time it takes to build friendships, because friendships take however many hundreds of hours of just being around each other to kind of build. What Sunday after Sunday, you got a
couple hours,
hour and a half, 52 times a year. Couple years, you got your 200 hours, right? And so that's not why we do it. The church is not a single mixers club where it's like, okay, this is a place where I can go to meet people.
You can cut your time in half by coming to small groups then. Look at that. Wow.
So it's not that you try to go A to B so fast, like, oh, the church is a good place to meet people. But in God's design, he has made a new people such that we wouldn't be lonely, such that we would have enduring friendships, such that we would have body attachment where we do feel like someone else cares about us.
Right.
Like that we're not expendable, that we do have an honor of being part of this body. And so just putting forth that as there are real and true downstream effects of us chasing what is good and right and true in God's economy. So that's God's new people. He has not deemed that we should be alone forever. Interestingly, you kind of hinted at this earlier with God being triune. He has never been lonely.
Right.
He has always been a lone God, but 3 in 1. He's never been lonely, and he brings us into that fellowship. Brings us into fellowship with him, brings us into fellowship with one another. That's really John's point at the beginning of his epistle. Yep. We have vertical fellowship with God. We have horizontal fellowship with one another. One of the great benefits of the church is to be in friendship with other people who are in friendship with Jesus.
Amen.
And so God has ordained a new people to accomplish that end. Thanks for taking some time to think.